Okay, we're rolling incense today. Now this is sandalwood, copal, frankincense, myrrh, a bunch of essential oils. Notice that I'm using no gloves. These are skin-safe essential oils. And a lot of other resins. And I've made a dough, and you can see that here. Made a dough. And I measure out 1 teaspoon, which is 5 milliliters. And I dip it in what's called a finishing powder. Now, for finishing powder, you can use a lot of different stuff. People use Mako powder, things like that. I use pure sandalwood powder from Mysore. The government there regulates the creation and distribution. So I lightly coat it with oil, and then your very, very light touch, because this is just a little bit too wet to be rolling. So I'm doing a very, very, very light touch, brushing it back and forth, keeping my hands flat to keep it so we're not making like a pregnant stick here. So I'm trying to keep it even all the way up. You can kind of squeeze it a little bit without creating square sides too badly. Now that's pretty good. That's going to put out a lot of smoke. It's a pretty thick stick. It's going to be great for smoke cleansing or for perfuming the room really quickly. What I often do is I burn these by sticking them into my cauldron in sand. And then as soon as I'm done with it, maybe about that far down because I have a very small home, then I'll tip it upside down and extinguish it into the sand. And that way I can use the same stick 5 or 6 times. But on full moons, I do burn an entire stick, and I use it for cleansing, purification, a lot of manifestation, because that's what this incense is made specifically for that. Now, if you have a regular incense burner that has holes, you can add a stick. Now, usually this is a bamboo stick that people use, and that's what's in most non-dupe incense, like a stick incense, and that enables you to stick that into your incense burner. Now, I use these toothpicks that are for, sandwiches and sushi, so they're not pointy on one end. It fits in most of the larger hold incense burners. I usually don't use these, but if you do want to elevate it either above the sand or in a standard incense burner, I try not to put it in there too far. I only go that far in. This is birch wood. I'm very specific about what wood I'm using for the full moon incense, and birch is really nice for that full moon incense. But I don't want to stick it in too far because what you want to burn is the incense, not the stick. I don't use bamboo for these. I would for maybe a new moon incense, but not for these. Now that's probably as thin as I'm going to get it, although my incense was ground very, very, very fine and sifted. I just don't want to go much thinner because it's going to lose structural integrity, because I do not use binders like most people would use. I'm relying on the fineness and the deep kneading that I've done. So that's one incense stick with the birchwood core. Now, going back to the dough, I'm going to scoop up another blob, get it pretty even. This way all of your sticks are going to be about the same size. So you're looking for consistency, and later on, as you get more advanced, you can regulate how long your incense is going to burn by how large it is, how wide it is, how much incense you're using in it. So I'm going to roughly shape it. Again, I'm dipping it in my finishing powder. Oops, I've almost lost it in there. Now it's kind of powdery, and that keeps it from sticking so badly. Also, I put a little finishing powder on this board that I'm using so that as it's drying, it can loosen. What will happen is it will dry on the top and begin to curl in and curl up. If you have it on some loose powder here, it tends to shrink as it's drying at an equal rate, keeping all of your incense sticks flat. So again, I'm doing a very, very light touch, just lightly going back and forth. Now, if I did a harder touch, let me show you what happens. It's going to smash and fold, and sometimes if your incense isn't powdered very finely enough, you'll start to create these cracks that run all the way through it, and the entire stick will separate. So now I have that little seam there, and to get it back to where I want it, I'm going to have to do a little finessing. But as you do this, I've been doing this for, I don't know, since the early 90s. You get a better touch at it. Now, this is probably one of the trickiest incense formulas I make, and I usually only sell it as a powder for use over charcoal. Although that same powder can be used, if you just take a pinch of it and put it down, you can use it in incense cone formers. And you can see I'm still struggling with this flattened area here because I used too heavy pressure just as a demonstration. So I'm going to keep rolling this until it's nice and even, or as even as I can get it now. And I'm starting to get some accumulation on my fingers, which is making it more difficult. So I'm going to scrape that off. There we go. So you can see that it's a little bit straighter. And you know, these are handmade. We're not using a machine. We're not using a press. I think there's a lot of artistry in the irregular shapes. I think it shows that it is genuine and handmade. But I do try to get as consistent as possible. Just like, you know, when you're making cookies, you want to make them nice and round and consistent for Christmas gifts, but also you don't want them to look like they got stamped out at a factory. So we're going to scoop again. And as you can see, although there's a couple $100 worth of ingredients here, from beginning to end, not including the charging of moon water and things like that I used to put in it, it takes about 12 hours for me to do a batch. And there's no way I can tack that price, like an hourly wage, onto the price of the incense. If you would like something like this, think of it as a special treat, as more of a novelty. I am barely making minimum wage, like not even making federal minimum wage, but I do enjoy this, and it's the only way I can get my own stash. Like if I want a pure natural incense that's non-toxic, yeah, the labels will say non-toxic, but that means they can put any ingredient in there, like FD&C red number 40 or whatever. Technically that's non-toxic, but I want just tree sap, you know, resins and finely powdered wood, and I want it sourced from places I really know. The frankincense I use in this, I got in the early 90s from a family from Oman that's been collecting it for 300 years, like several generations. And I got a large burlap bag of that in the 90s, and I lost contact with them around the early 2000s, and I'm afraid with the war-torn area that they may not be around. They're definitely not available, but I keep trying to connect with them. So here we've got another stick, and you can see because I measured it ahead of time in the little teaspoon, the 5 milliliters, they're going to be about consistently the same size. Just about. You know, there's going to be some variation. You might get some a little thinner, but pretty much you're going to get the same size here. So again, I'm roughly measuring out my dough, rolling it, dipping it in finishing powder, allowing a little extra finishing powder to sprinkle on the board I'm using. Now, you can see a bamboo cutting board underneath this, but I am using those really thin plastic guards because once it's done, you really don't want to move it, especially when it's this soft, because it's, as I said, it's a little softer than you'd want for rolling incense. So I will slide this whole thing off onto a wire shelf with the plastic and put a new plastic liner on and keep going. I usually do this as I'm marathon watching shows on TV, so even though I'm not making quite minimum wage, I do have such a great time, and I know that I'm imbuing it with the full moon. I'm focusing on that energy, even when I'm stirring it, because this is an incense for manifestation of intentions. All of the movements I do are clockwise, or sunwise, docile, if you will, and a lot of intention goes into this. Now, as you know, I don't cast spells for people, but I do what I call mise en place magic, which, much like cooking, you have a sous chef that does all the chopping and the mixing for you. So pretty much I have aligned all the ingredients together, but you have to add your intention. You know, my intention is very blank. It's for manifestation. It's to get things going. Now on this one, you can see that a little tiny piece broke off, and you could reincorporate that, but it's looking really good, and I don't want to mess with it. So I'm going to call that one good. And a lot of times these little foo bars, those are the ones I keep for my stash, and I pick the best of the best for people to package up for gifts and sales. All right, so that is rolling the full moon incense. There's going to be a charging later under the full moon, but I start this at the last quarter, or what is it? Well, about 7 days before the full moon, because that's about how long it takes from beginning to end to get all the ingredients together, to grind them, to sift them, to grind them again, to sift them again, and to continue all this procedure. Then I add moon water from the last full moon. This particular batch has moon water also from the 2024 eclipse, where I was in the path of totality. So since I needed almost 3 cups of water, because I had a lot of big batch here, I used different waters from different areas. And this is all fresh spring water. Today I'll be using melted snow for my full moon water, and I'll do another video on that, but blessed be.